As you have likely noticed by now, Shanna is not here this Sunday. She is on vacation this week, and she'll be back with us next week. This is the third week in a series that we've called A Centered Summer. If you want a tongue twister, try saying A Centered Summer Sermon Series 4 times fast. This is our third week. Throughout this series, we have used the central image of a labyrinth. And in our first week, we talked about thirst, about what leads us to embark on the journey of spiritual depth and formation, what calls us out of ourselves into this walking of a life of faith. Last week, we found ourselves in the center of the labyrinth. I'm going to skip a few steps here and go straight to the middle. In fact, when we finished last week, abiding in the center of the circle, we rested in a fundamental truth of who we are. In fact, it was so fundamental that we asked ourselves to repeat it over and over again a few different times. Who I am is beloved of God. When you come to the center of the spiritual journey, at its heart is a fundamental truth. Who I am is beloved of God. I just want to stay here. I don't know if many of you have come to walk this labyrinth. I know that some of you have. It's a great labyrinth to come and walk if you're looking for one because it's inside. If you don't want to walk this labyrinth, we have a list of labyrinths down in the church office according to your caring circles. No matter where you live in the city, we have found at least 3 labyrinths within 10 minutes of where you live. You can pick that up after worship if you want to. Some of you have walked labyrinths outside of this time and this space, and some of you have walked labyrinths at other points in your life. But for anyone who's ever done it, the practice of coming to the center, you enter into the labyrinth and you walk the pathways, and as you walk, you bring an intent with you and you try to set behind, to let go, to leave on the trail certain things that you might be carrying that might weigh on your spirit or that you might need to just let go of for a minute. And you find yourself in the center in the knowledge that you are beloved of God. That no matter where you go, the centering truth of your life in particular is that you, no matter who you are, no matter what you do, no matter what label the world puts on you, are beloved. When I think about the center of the circle, I'm reminded of a place I got to go. I actually have a picture of it. This place is in Bosnia. About 9 years ago, I was with a group from Week of Compassion, and we got to go to this spot. This is known as Blagaj, B-L-A-G-A-J, Blagaj. Blagaj is in the southeastern part of Bosnia. The building that you see is a 600-year-old monastery for whirling dervishes. It is a sacred site in southeastern Bosnia. And as you can see, it's this beautiful monastery that literally hangs over a fresh spring. The water is so beautiful and crystal clear blue. We were there at evening time when we went. We had been told that we'd have dinner at one of the restaurants that's kind of right there by that monastery place, and so we did. It was a simple supper of fish and potatoes. And after dinner, we walked across a simple concrete bridge to go to the Whirling Dervish House, and we took a tour. It's not much to look at, beautiful tapestries and carpets, but kind of like you'd expect a monastery to be inside, pretty simple. It's the surroundings that make it special. And as we prepared to go, our tour guide told us, they said, you have one more thing you have to do. You have to climb the Blagaj steps and drink from the spring. Go one more picture ahead for me. The Blagaj steps are 6 or 7 steps right down to crystal clear blue water. One by one, our group of 8 stepped down those stairs. There is a small handrail there. And at the end of that rail, there's a small chain attached to a silver seashell bowl. It said that it's a blessing to take a scoop of that water and drink it. So each one of us did. Now, I was taught not to drink from streams or creeks. So I'll admit a little bit of trepidation in going down. But I got to the bottom of the stairs, and I took the silver seashell, and I dipped it in the water, and I brought it up to my mouth. Do you have a memory of the coldest, crispest, clearest drink of water you've ever had? That's what that was. I said in the 8:30 service it was like licking a glacier. Although I've never done that, and I don't know for sure what it's like. Cold, crisp, cool, clear. I wanted to dive into the water, to let it soak me. It was like being at the center of the labyrinth, to remember that I was beloved. That's kind of what the center feels like for me in some ways. It's a place of deep comfort and rest. And I wish that this was the memory that I held of the labyrinth in my life, at least the core. I wish it was all there was to the center of the labyrinth for me, but it's not. I have a new memory of the center of the labyrinth, a fresh one. Over the course of the last 2 years or so, I have been part of this thing called the Academy for Spiritual Formation. We would meet once a quarter up in the state of Nebraska, in Schuyler, Nebraska. Have any of you all ever been to Schuyler, Nebraska? All right, you don't have a reason to have gone there. It's a home of a meat packing plant. It's a delightful little town with a Dollar General, but beyond that, there's not much. Outside of Schuyler, just north of it, is an old German Benedictine monastery. And the monks who live there have built this beautiful concrete retreat center. We met there once a quarter over the course of 2 years, and we received hospitality from those monks, and it was a wonderful experience. So much so that we decided together that we needed to find some way to say thank you to them. So we went to Father Thomas, the head of the monastery, and we said, what can we do as a gift to give back to you all? And he said, wouldn't you know it, I've really wanted to build a labyrinth here. Well, our group thought that was right up our alley, and so we met with Ben, the groundskeeper at the monastery, and Ben said, absolutely, let's do this. I'll rent a sod cutter for the next time you're here. We'll begin the work of mapping everything out. And so Ben designed a massive labyrinth. Cut ahead one more picture for me here. We worked in August to start the labyrinth. There was a central post that Ben planted, and he tied a string to it, and on the other end of the string, he tied a can of spray paint, and he made one big circle. And then he stepped in by about 18 inches, and he made another big circle, and so on until you see this, an 11-circuit labyrinth. 11 circuit, it's the rings. You count each one. There are 11 rings until you get to the center. When we began to build the labyrinth together, Ben said to us, we're going to start from the middle out. I can use the sod cutter to cut down on the rings. It's pretty easy for me to do that. But as far as the center goes, I need you all to be hands-on. Go one more picture for me. When you get closer to that center, just a little bit closer, you can see that there are 6 petals. It's harder to get around those. So we had those little hot shot shovels to scoop down. We were removing ground about 6 inches down. There were a group of about 8 of us who were working on the labyrinth that day. And I don't know what you see when you see me, but the group that we were working with looked at me and they said, "You look like a hauler." They began to go down 6 inches into the ground, and I had 2 5-gallon buckets, one for each arm. And they would clear ground about every 6 or so inches. They would fill one of those buckets. And my job was to take those buckets from the center of that labyrinth back to that pasture you see, like 4 football fields away, and then to walk back with the buckets and to have them filled again. It is the definition of insanity. It took 2 hours for 7 people in one hauler to clear the center of the labyrinth. But this is the finished product. It's pretty cool, isn't it? My guess is that many of us, when we get to the heart of the labyrinth, want to stay here. But at the heart of the labyrinth, at the heart of our faith, really, in the life of the journey, there's a tension between resting in the knowledge that we are beloved of God, refreshed, cool, crisp water flowing into our lives, and on the other side of that middle is the realization that we can't stay here. There's a journey left. There's hard work to do. There's something else that calls to us. That this truth that we meet right here requires or asks of us. I love the story. I love the story of Jesus sitting by the well at noon. John is very particular about times. He puts them in our face so that they might pay attention to us and we might pay attention to them. Jesus sits by the well at noon. This should be as plain as day. As he sits there, worn and weary from his journey, the disciples have gone on to find a McDonald's. A woman comes to the well from Samaria. And you know, Jesus is not exactly kind in this story. He says, "Give me something to drink." And you kind of picture this woman with a hand on her hip going, "You didn't bring a bucket. Who are you, a Jewish man, to talk to me, a Samaritan woman, that way?" Jesus says, "If you knew the kind of water that I was offering, you wouldn't be acting that way." Inquiring a little bit more, he says, "I offer the living water, the water that bubbles up in the Spirit and flows out into the world and gives life eternal to all." The most interesting part of their interaction to me is how quickly this woman says, "Give me that water." There's a deep thirst and a hunger there. She requests it immediately. After Jesus is brash and rude and crass to her, exhausted as he well probably was. "Give me that water." An important truth about the labyrinth that we haven't really talked about is that while you might get to find one that you get to walk alone, these pathways are crowded with other people. It might be the case that as you walk this labyrinth, you're setting behind relationships that you don't want to focus on or you need to take a break from. It might be that you're letting them go or forgiving some of them. It might be that as you walk these pathways, you're remembering that you needed to tell something to someone and remind them of something. The reality of the labyrinth is that we don't walk it alone. The life of faith is one that we walk with other people, so that when we come to the center, to the well, it's inevitable. Someone else will come to draw water too. And often when they come, they're not the people we want to meet at the well. They're the people we look at and we say, I forgot my bucket, and I really don't want to ask you for this because I just really don't like you. But can I borrow your bucket? Maybe it says something about the life of the church in the world today that many churches exist in our midst who have come to the center of the life of faith and who have remembered that they are beloved of God and that their message is about being beloved of God. There are many who have come there. And when they come here, they find the comfort and the rest of that message, and they just make their bed and they lay down there. And while that bed is comfortable at first, for many, slowly but surely, it becomes a hospice bed. There's something about being here that calls us to be out there. It's the twofold move of faith. Remember that you are beloved, and remember that you are called to remind the world that they are beloved too. Perhaps one of the most important movements of the spiritual life together is helping others to remember their own belovedness. The life of living in the stream of living water is something that's meant to flow out of us into the lives of others and into the life of the world. It's an invitation, not to comfort, but to inclusion and grace, to the gospel truth that all are beloved. There are long spiritual traditions that say that once you realize that you are beloved of God, you should set yourself apart. We call many of these folks cloistered or hermits. Different measures of monasticism say that you can really set yourself apart. But even those orders say that you have to give something back to the world. You have to let something off of yourself, pick something up. We come to the center of our being to remind us of what makes us come truly alive for the world. Howard Thurman says, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who have come alive and are doing it." What calls you out? The spiritual journey is not to embark on a thirst and to find the middle and stay there. It's to embark on a thirst to find the middle and to stay there, and then to work through prayer and action in the world. That's hard work. Yesterday morning, I was walking in a church parking lot near my house. I didn't tell this story at the 8:30 service because I was still mad about it. I was walking in a parking lot near my house. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. No one was there. I let my dog off her leash to run through the fields that are around that church, my dog who is afraid of plastic bags. She ran through the fields and she had a great time. We were there for 45 minutes, and as she ran up to me so I could put her leash on her for us to leave, I heard footsteps behind me and then a voice. "You do know that this city has ordinances that say that that dog should be on a leash at all times." I turned to find a woman running next to me, and I said, "Good morning. Happy Saturday. I'm sorry." As I walked home, I thought about her. I wondered what the call of God was in that for me to love her. I also thought of about 1,000 other things I could have said that were much meaner than that. But that call of God to love her was in there. When we move out of the center, from the side of the well where we have encountered others, it asks more of us than perhaps we know how to give. This is the life of faith. To come, to know, and to remind the world. That labyrinth was done, and on the last morning of the academy, I had the chance to walk out there again early in the hours of the morning and to sit in the center of that labyrinth. I sat down on the ground in the quiet and the cool, and I just sat there And I remembered the comfort. Somewhere over here, I heard weeping, audible sobbing. At first I was mad. Who is disturbing my 6 a.m. sit in this labyrinth? Who is calling in this moment? Your crying is disrupting my peace. So I opened my eyes and I stood up and I looked over that way. And there was one of my fellow pilgrims on the spiritual formation journey, weeping on a bench. I knew the moment I looked at her, I remembered her husband had passed away in a sudden accident 3 weeks before. She had come outside to be alone, perhaps so that no one might hear her cry. From that center of God's belovedness, I skipped the circuits. And I went over and I sat with her. I put my arm around her, and I sat quietly as I thought the presence and the Spirit of God might do with me. And I held her in her belovedness. When we work in our lives from the center, God opens in us the possibility to help others remember their belovedness too, and to find wholeness and healing, not only for themselves, but for the world. Let us live from the center in all we do. Amen.